Today is Monday, President's Day. Ready. You good? Everybody good? Okay. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the program committee meeting. This morning is Monday. It is February 19th. It is President's Day. Happy President's Day, everybody. We did not have a need for an executive session prior to this meeting. So if everybody would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Mr. Mummert, would you please take attendance?
Mr. Galzella.
Here.
Mr. Gelsinger.
Here.
Mr. Lady.
Here.
Mrs. Weaver.
Here.
4 present, 0 absent.
So just because there are some new faces in the audience today, I'd just like to run through how these meetings typically work. You are at a committee meeting. Committee meetings are not the entirety of the board, therefore no votes are made. Committee meetings are created so that topics can be approached, whether they be financial, program-based, personnel-based, things like that. Then anything we discuss today will be brought back to the entire board. If you have anything on our agenda this morning, which our agenda consists of a middle school presentation on the process for selecting books. If you have anything in reference to that agenda item that you would like to speak about, you will have the opportunity to do that. Then the presentation will occur. And after that, there will be another space at the end of the meeting for any visitors who might want to comment on the presentation or anything else in reference to today's meeting. In the event that you would like your comments to be made to the entire board, please understand we are a subset of the board. The entire board will meet February 28th, and you are always welcome to attend those meetings as well. Okay, at this time, is there anyone who wishes to speak prior to the middle school presentation? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going through them, sorry.
Just kidding. Okay. So we did have people sign in. Thank you so much. Okay, so these, all of those that have signed in to speak, you will be welcome to do that after the presentation, as the presentation is not your listed reason for wanting to speak, but we are happy to have you speak after the presentation. And thank you all for signing in. This is wonderful. Okay, so with no further, we have Mrs. Clansick with us today. Mrs. Clansick is an 8th grade English teacher here at our middle school. She teaches English as well as honors English. Correct? What am I missing? How long have you been with us?
I've been here
14 years. Wonderful. Thank you.
Was not expecting to be speaking to quite so many people, but love anytime we're here to talk about books, that's a good thing. And before I get into the presentation, I sort of want to take off my teacher hat and put on my parent hat for a minute.
Absolutely.
Oh, I need to be.
Yeah, got to be mic. Or you can walk. You can walk.
I can stand here.
If you're more comfortable there, absolutely.
I'm not used to doing this, so my apologies. But so when my kids came through school, I had 3 kids, and they were all very different, right? What one of them could read, the other one probably would not have. And when my kids came through, a book series that was very popular was The Hunger Games, if any of you remember this. And at the time, this was a series that was just very edgy. There was a lot of violence. And my middle daughter, I did not want her to read this until she got older. Like, I just knew how she would handle it. I knew what she would experience with it. My younger daughter, those of you who have kids know that in the birth order, sometimes that younger one grows up a little bit faster. And so she probably read the book a little bit earlier than my other daughter did. And I think that's the hard thing that we have to consider here today, is as we think about the books that we put in front of our kids, in middle school, we have such a range of maturity levels. I've heard people say that middle school is challenging because you have kids who play with Barbie dolls and kids who look like Barbie dolls. There's just such a range of maturity. And so our conversation today is really important. I'm really proud of the work that the EHMMS Middle School has done to have very rich, expansive classroom libraries. I have 600 books in my classroom for my kids to read on a regular basis. And so we're here to sort of talk about what the process is for teachers selecting books to go on their classroom library shelf. So these are the libraries that are in the teachers' classrooms. Independent reading is a huge part of our curriculum. Reading is dropping off. Kids are more on devices. Kids are playing video games. And so we want to do everything we can to get kids to be reading as much as possible. So I'm going to stop talking, hop over here and pull up the presentation for a minute.
Mrs. Clancy, we're going to bring the floating mic to you so that you don't have to jockey back and forth.
Thank you. So just in terms of our presentation, and I can share this with any of the board members afterwards as well. And I have for you this is a copy of our classroom library letter. So I'm going to bring that around. I only have 10 copies because I was not anticipating this many people. So I will bring it around to the board. Yep. Yep. Oh. Yep. I think there might be 2 there. Okay. And so this is just a library letter that goes out to all of our parents at the very beginning of the school year. And the beginning part that you see up there is just the beginning part of our letter. And I'll go ahead and read it. I know you can read it, but sometimes it helps to hear things. A central goal of the ELA team at EHMMS is to help students develop a reading habit that leads to a literate life. As adolescents are surrounded by more and more technology and entertainment, that reading habit becomes harder and harder to develop and maintain. Science shows the benefits of reading in a person's life, some of which include reducing stress, reducing mental decline with aging, strengthening writing and building vocabulary, building stamina needed for high school and beyond, and developing empathy and understanding for others. We believe students can and will become passionate readers when they encounter the right book. To help achieve this goal, our ELA classrooms are fortunate to have robust classroom libraries for students to enjoy. We have prioritized building our collections as research shows that the availability of books increases student reading. Students who read more read better. On the next slide, and again, I will share this presentation out. These are sort of our 2 rationales for consistent classroom library procedures. We have had classroom libraries for probably 20 years. And so teachers have sort of maybe used their own systems for choosing books, selecting books. I have confidence in how they've done that, but we never had a consistent policy or standard of how we did that. So what you're hearing today is our rationale for having sort of some consistency in how we choose those books. So the number one thing is that it's going to meet the developmental and literacy needs of all our students. Notice that it doesn't say age appropriate. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's very tricky. In my classroom, I have students who are reading at a 9th and 10th grade level who need more challenging books. I also have students who just need a really sweet, innocent story about a dog and their best friend, and that's all they need. And so I have to know what my kids need. We also want to ensure that classroom libraries continue to be a key component of our ELA curriculum. I've talked to colleagues in other districts, and out of maybe some fear and reservation, some of them have completely removed their classroom libraries from their classrooms. And so we don't want that to happen here at EHMMS. We want our kids to have access to books, and I think that's going to continue. I have 100% confidence that this district values our classroom libraries and that we want to make sure that our kids are getting those books and that they're just developmentally appropriate for the kids who are in our classrooms. And that falls on our shoulders. Like your ELA teachers, I have to know my kids. I maintain a binder the beginning of the year. This is a binder of all the letters that come back to me. And so if I have a student whose parents have said, well, I don't want my child reading about this topic, I know that I'm not going to hand that book to that child. I'm going to be mindful of that and make sure that I'm giving them the books that they need. So those are sort of our 2 rationale for this information. I'm not going to go through all this. These are links to different research that shows how important independent reading is to develop kids' reading abilities. They have to be able to choose books that they want to read. And we often talk about mirror and window books. It's really important for kids to have a mirror book where they see themselves in the book. I can relate to this character. I'm a football player. I can relate. My parents are going through a divorce. I can relate to the characters in this book. But we also think it's important for them to have window books. And those window books are opportunities to look into someone else's life and see someone else's perspective. We also talk about the fact that in our ELA classrooms, we always want to consider that what we read, does it change, challenge, or confirm our thinking? I read things that I don't always agree with. I read things that I do agree with. I read things that make me say, I want to go figure out more about this. And I do think that that's a healthy balance for our students as well to have that range of abilities. So this research is just some of the stuff that validates independent reading. So starting in 24, 25, so this like coming up school year, what we would like to do is number one, we're going to include that a variety of texts of various formats, genres, and types are there to appeal to a range of interests and expose students to different text formats, types of print, and perspectives. I have Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I have Adam Grant's newest social psychology book, Hidden Potential, in my classroom. And there needs to be that range for all of those things. We are going to include selections for students reading below, at, or above grade level. This is where it gets tricky. I have students in my classroom who are reading at 9th and 10th grade levels. So I need to have, if I hand them Diary of a Wimpy Kid, that is not going to stretch them as a reader, is not going to stretch them as a thinker. So I have to have that range. Every teacher has to have that range of books. We'll consult some different best book lists, Newbery Awards, YALSA, Scholastic, Nerdy Book Club. Those are usually run by teachers and librarians who just want to get good books into kids' hands. The newest thing that we're going to implement, and I can have, if you have a computer, you're welcome to check this out. If you don't, that's fine too, but it's called, and it's what our school libraries used. It's called Follett Tidal Wave. And what it does is it compiles all of the reviews of that book. So if I were going to punch in, I'll go ahead and see if I can get signed in here.
You know where that website is that run by the ALA or?
I believe it's a library sourcing. I think it's where our libraries get their books. So I'm not sure. Yes. Follett, I think is, yes. No, we don't, yeah. This is a free site, so all teachers have free access to this site. There's no cost to use this site. So I mentioned at the beginning the Hunger Games. So I'm just going to go ahead and punch that in. And then you'll see that this comes up book 1. But what I really like about this is that then there are different reviews that are going to be listed for this book. Okay, and this might be a little bit older. So here's 18 reviews and awards. And what I really like is it lists for each one an age recommendation. So you can see there's one that's like grades 9 to 12. You can read other reviews. Okay. And if we go down here, it would have different ages 11 and up. So you can see there's a range between like 11-year-old or a 9th grader. But this puts all of the reputable reviews in one place. Like a teacher doesn't have to, like before I would go to one place and look, and I'd go to another place and look. And it would take a lot of time to vet all of those books that I was putting on my shelf. This has it all in one place. And so we really like that that is there, and that's a possibility. And the fact that our libraries already use this just maintains consistency in terms of that. So any book that a teacher wants to put on their classroom shelf, they would need to go to Follett's Tidal Wave for reviews and recommendations. And so then if there would be a title without an age-appropriate review. So let me give you an example. My kids love the book Scythe. It's a trilogy. It's similar to Hunger Games in terms of like the violence of that. And that is listed at a 9th grade level. If that book would be read and approved by at least 2 other EHMMS classroom teachers, that would be allowed to then be placed on a shelf, but it can't be one person's perspective. It would need to have some other viewpoints brought in. And I've read the book Scythe. there's nothing in there to me that is, that would be questionable for that to be on a 7th or 8th grade classroom library shelf. When we manage the classroom library, that library letter goes home to all families at the beginning of the school year. And as I said, I keep a binder of all of the letters, so I know what my students can and should be reading. That letter comes back, and if it does not come back signed by a parent, they're not able to use our classroom library. It's a way for they're opting in to use our classroom library. And that signed library letter is maintained by teachers throughout the year for selecting books from that classroom library. So that's the procedures we would like to put sort of in place for some consistency. At this point, I'm happy to turn it back over, I guess, after I have shared my information, but I am happy to stick around and answer any other questions. Dr. Smale is here as well.
And I want to thank Mrs. Klanzik for that presentation. One of the things we really try to do is be very transparent. And if you take a look at the letter that we passed out, we want parents to be involved. We want parents to have choices if they're concerned with a particular book or content of a book. They can let our teachers know. They will work very, very hard to make sure they get books in the hands of our students. That challenge them, but also that the parents are in support of. If I could just go back and talk a little bit about, for example, Hunger Games. So when I was an assistant principal here, before I became the principal, Mrs. Klanzik talked about her own children, but we did have some parents who were concerned. And I'll just speak personally, and my mother will not watch the movies. She just will not, because she's like, I will not watch a movie in which children are killed and murdered. Believe it or not, Harry Potter was another book that we received some questions about because of the black magic. And you think about that now of how mainstream both of those movies are and books are. But it's in one respect, it's in the eye of the beholder, and we respect that. We want every parent to have some input in those choices. But our goal, we all think back to when we were young, and if you have a book in front of you that you're not interested in, it can be very difficult, specifically for an early adolescent, to be engaged in it and read it. However, if you put a book in front of them that they're interested in and they can connect to, they are much more likely to read that book and get a lot out of it. So that's really the philosophy of our program. Over the last few years, we have really put some things in place with the letter going home to our parents to make sure that, and we really push our kids to get those letters back. So that's something that we feel, allows for that transparency and gives our parents some input in the choices that they have. Okay.
Do any of my fellow board members have any questions for Mrs. Klanzik? I want to be very careful with her time because she has kids to get back to teaching. So please, if any of you have any questions you would like to ask in reference to the presentation, go right ahead.
This letter, we're already sending this exact letter home, or was there anything?
The only adjustment that was made to the letter is there was some slight rewording. In the second full paragraph, it says, although our libraries are open to all students, we recognize and are sensitive to having age-appropriate reading material in our classroom. That said, what is considered appropriate may vary from one parent to another. We added the words, for example, in that first sentence because we didn't want, the next sentence goes on to explain some things that could be in books. We didn't want it to seem like that was what all books had. So we added the phrase, for example.
Yep.
Everything else is exactly as the letter went home to parents at the beginning of the year.
I did sign, my 8th grader has Mrs. Klanzik this year in her honors class, and we did sign this letter and also had a conversation with our daughter in reference to what we would hope she would be pulling to read.
I don't have any questions, just a comment. Thanks for your presentation. You could tell you put a lot of work into it. So thank you.
We're very proud of what we do at the middle school, and our kids leave as readers. And that I would just hate to see anything maybe change that.
So again, I do as well. I want to thank you for your involvement and your presentation on this. It's a topic very dear to you, I can tell. And I appreciate you meeting with other teachers to kind of collaborate on this, to to find common ground so we can understand what your concerns are. That's important in developing, moving forward. The concern I have with where we're at now is, as a parent, you're not going to be able to read, you're not going to have the time to read every book in a child's classroom library. And that's why initially in looking this, I think it's appropriate for us to consider categories of what books are in our library, categorizing books that parents might want to opt in or opt out of. I'm not saying we would categorize to remove. I'm saying we would categorize to present to parents, hey, this falls into what we consider this category, so that they can kind of be directed to areas that they might find that they don't want their kids involved with. And I don't consider that a book ban as much as just helping the parent to understand what topics might be involved in a book. Did you guys discuss a categorization at all, or?
Um, we did discuss that in our perspective as ELA teachers. That gets into a slippery slope in terms of categorizing. If there is a kiss in a book, does that then get categorized as having sex in it, right? Like that gets tricky. Here's what I have found, and I can only speak from like the experience in my room. If a student picks up a book and they've read the back cover, and if I know, I have my letters, right? And so the parent who writes in and says, I do not want my child reading about books that contain gender identity, then I'm going to steer them to a different book. I'm going to have that. I never want to put a book in a kid's hand that is going to harm, damage, hurt them in any way. Like we probably worry about that more than anybody else. And when you think about it, our kids read, if we're lucky, 15 or 20 minutes a day, and then they turn to their social media and they're bombarded with so many awful things there. I find that when a student picks up a book, and if they aren't comfortable, they bring it back. Like they return it. They're like, this was not for me. And they might not give me a reason. They're like, this just wasn't my book. And they put it back, and then we find another book. So I would be very hesitant and fearful of categorizing books when we have the back cover. We have sites that we can go to for this information. We have Common Sense Media. We have other tools as opposed to putting labels on books. So I'm, as the curriculum leader, I would be hesitant to go that route.
If I can, just to what he's saying, wouldn't it be easier though, if you were to categorize at your example, the Hunger Games, was categorized at a level for violence, for graphic violence. If we had a category that we knew, and I'm not saying we categorize everything, like we don't have to have a history section and but when we're categorizing for parent involvement, there could be categories of a parent, like you said, which child doesn't want to read those things. We could easily have a category saying this is a book that falls into the category of violence. It doesn't mean that it's too graphic for some, but if a parent knows that their child wouldn't take well to something like that, then they could say on the letter, please don't give my child anything violent. And
Right.
wouldn't that be a simple categorization? I get that there's gray areas,
Right.
but
Well, and
in the case of a gray area, it would be easy to say, listen, I don't find the Hunger Games violent, but the reviews say that it is, so it would fall under that category.
To me, this is like this is the category, like we're putting this in the hands of the parents. So if I send this home to you, you're like, I really want to limit my child's, access to violent books. So then I have that, and I know that for that child, like I think parents have the right, and I would say even more importantly, the responsibility to know what their children are reading. Like they need to know that. They need to be aware of that. And so I feel like we were very proactive in providing this, in giving parents a chance to say, please make sure, these are the books I want my child to have. Like, and I know the dedication of our teachers. I know they use these. I know they refer to these. I just am, I would be very hesitant to do the categorization.
So to that point, so you say that this letter allows a parent to say no violent books for my kid, for example. This is more, do you find that you get like parents say, I don't want my child exposed to sexual content, or do they identify books specifically? Because the challenge here is if I as a parent say, I don't want my kid exposed to sexual content books, who's vetting what is sexual content books? And that's where we have to set, that's where I see us as setting a bar. And to your point, not something that's vague or if, may or may not be, something that clearly has that content can be very easily identified, right? If something clearly has killing children, we can label that violent, pretty self-assuredly, right? And to that point, our categorization should be books we can clearly categorize as a starting point without creating a back and forth on gray area books. We could minimalistically categorize books that are very clearly sexual content, violence. Do you disagree with that, or?
Um, I just know that, so I've been teaching for 14 years. I have not had this I have not had I've had kids bring books back. I have not had a I know what books are in my library. I
Mhm.
know what's there. I know what I need to hand kids. I'm just concerned, like, I think about the amount of time it would take for teachers with a classroom library of 600 books to categorize them. And then, like, I just am very fearful of putting a label on, like, this has an LGBTQ character, or this has violence, or I'm just, I personally struggle with that.
Well, and I think if it was a physical categorization, the other issue you run into is some of them will fall into multiple categories.
They will.
So,
Can I add a perspective from the administration?
by all
I didn't
means,
mean to cut you off.
no, by all means.
So my fear is, I understand the perspective of parents being informed about what their students are reading. 100% agree with that. I think that what you've produced here is a very, I feel, effective way, because I don't want to say forces, but it forces the parent to be aware of what they're reading. I think if we start to categorize, time is going to be an issue. Classroom libraries are done. They'll be done. Teachers will just say, I'm not doing it. I'm going to get rid of it. And we are going to inadvertently ban books and ban's the wrong word, but we're going to eliminate options of books to kids, because the teachers, rightfully so, are going to say, I have enough to do. I can't categorize it. I feel like, from my perspective from the administration, Dr. Smale, I want your opinion on this as well, is that if a student takes a book home that may say, for example, I might say, I don't want my son to read about motorcycles because he wants one and I don't want him to have one. It's just going to put something in his mind. And I write that to you, Mrs. Classic, and Jacob somehow sneaks that book home, and it comes back. There's a follow-up conversation with the parent, I would imagine. Sorry about that. Understood. We'll make sure. Now, if we find a book, and I feel comfortable saying this because Dr. Smale and I dealt with this earlier this year, if we find a book that is truly objectionable with some material that should not be in the hands of a student in this middle school, we remove it. And we follow the same process. So what you presented today, Mrs. Clancy, I found it to be very thorough, in that if you want to recommend a book, 2 other teachers might or have to then endorse that book, which I think is outstanding, because we do have exceptional teachers in the district. If I could add one suggestion, if that could somehow be presented to the administration in that building, so they are aware of a book that's being added in case it becomes problematic, where some people are objectionable to it. And I think that what you've done here is you've sort of given you've given a comprehensive view. My biggest fear is, if we categorize and put that on you as a teacher or teachers, classroom libraries will disappear. And I think you alluded to that earlier when you said that other colleagues in other districts have gotten rid of them. And my biggest fear is that we take away, we push kids away from print and back to media, because media has far, in my opinion, Jay Burkhart's opinion, no one else's, that is far more detrimental to a child than a book. So, Dr. Smale, I don't know if you have anything to add
Yeah,
to
so
that.
just 2 things to add. We have tasked our teachers, sorry. We have tasked our teacher, particularly our language arts department, because this is who this really impacts, with looking at, there's specific apps that are out there in which you can basically put every book in your library on them. And the kids have access to that. The parents can have access to that. And it shows all the books in the library, and it does provide a synopsis of the book and a review that a parent would be able to look into. So that's something that we currently have in place. It's sort of ongoing, because we started it last year, and it was something that we knew we wanted to provide transparency for our parents. And I actually have shared that with Mr. Gelazella himself, and I think that's something that is a very positive thing. So that's just is what I would add to that. I did have another thought, but it slipped my mind right now, but I will, when it comes back to me, I will share it.
We'll spark each other's thoughts, I'm sure, right?
So thank you. So to what you just spoke about, as far as cataloging, I do appreciate you taking the initiative, I believe early on last year, to start requesting your teacher's catalog. And I believe about halfway through the year, you said that they had cataloged almost everything in the school. And that's why I find this argument that teachers don't have time to categorize them a little absurd. If we cataloged 600 books in one classroom in 6 months, to go back through there and say, these are violent, these are sexual, would be much simpler than that. So the fact that we're making this argument that libraries would completely go away if we required teachers to categorize them is a little fear-mongering, considering we cataloged our entire libraries inside of 6 months. We're not asking for this to happen inside of a week. We're just asking for this to be a goal at some point. And we're not even asking it yet. We're just considering if this would be an option. So that's all I would have to say towards the idea of categorizing them.
Am I correct in my assumption that that is just a scanner that would scan the back of the ISBN number and then you'd be able to upload the book, similar to if you were selling a book on eBay or Amazon where you don't have to insert all of the information yourself, it autofills?
That is correct.
Yeah,
And
so-
to give you a picture, when you go onto the website, it shows a little picture of the cover of the book, and then there's a synopsis of the book and a review. What the thought that I was going to share before is where this is a little different than what we've done before. In the past, I'll admit, teachers have on their own, typically in many cases, chosen books for their classrooms, and that has happened in the past. And this does provide a little more of a comprehensive process because it would go through multiple teachers. And, you have teachers at different phases. You have some teachers who are younger, some teachers who are older, some teachers who have kids, some teachers who don't. And, there's different perspectives to that. I mean, I'm just using that as examples. And by asking a second, maybe a third teacher, or even bringing a book to me and saying, Dr. Smale, this is a book that's a little more mature. Do you want to look through it and review it and give me your perspective? I think that allows us to really make a determination. Is this book something that maybe we should hold off and say, hey, young man or young lady, just wait till you're in high school, or young man, young lady, let's talk to your parents first. Those are kind of things that I think we have tried to tighten up on that, for better or worse, weren't real tight before. And I think in talking with the department and talking with Steph, I think we feel good that this would really be a good process and would continue to provide excellent books for our kids. When you take a look at all the the Nerdy Books Club, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of parents write reviews to that. Am I correct?
It's teachers who write.
Teachers, I'm sorry.
reviews to that.
Teachers write reviews there, so that's something that's kind of an organic site that with a lot of different perspectives. And I feel really good that this would provide appropriate books for our kids.
Are these catalogs available to parents now that you're referencing?
Yes.
Right, to that point, it's on Canvas now, I believe. You can go and look at your classroom libraries.
It depends on the teacher, not
Depends
all
on the
teachers
teachers,
do.
okay.
Like it depends, and that I would worry too about that in terms, like if we're doing our due diligence and having those I would hate for people to be like, okay, I'm going to pull up Mrs. Clancy's list and I'm going to see what books does she have in here. I'm going to go research and be like, oh, this one might, and then people who have not even read the books are questioning the books that are there, right? So that gets tricky. Like I 100% believe in transparency. I would walk you up to my classroom library right now and let everyone take a look at what's there because I'm that confident in what I have on my shelves. I don't know that these catalogs are posted openly for I don't know. I'm not sure how that's it is on, you can go to my Canvas site and you can pull up my classroom library. And if you have your child's login, you can see, if you want to take the time to scroll through all 600 books, you can see what's there. But I don't know that every teacher has it. And I don't ever anticipate us having a site somewhere that says, these are all the books that are in all the libraries of the middle school.
Well, because your child is with one teacher, right?
Yes.
So I have seen Maddie's Canvas page and I've been able to pull that up because the classroom books in your library are not going to be the same books as in the
Correct.
teacher to the right or the left of you.
Correct.
I think the bottom line, the perspective I always come back to is, obviously we want our kids to have appropriate books, but I have children in the district. I'm a community member myself. A lot of our teachers, are also members of the community. We want what's best for each individual kid, but we also want what's best for our community, and we also want what's best for our school. And it all comes down to a partnership with parents. Anytime a parent would contact me or contact a teacher with any issue with any book, we are absolutely going to work with them on whatever their concern is. And if we need to, we'll provide an alternative book, an alternative assignment. Where this comes into play, if I could just move away from ELA, another area where I typically get a lot of input and feedback from parents is in our health curriculum. Because as kids are coming of age, in middle school, we start talking about reproduction, we start talking about drugs and alcohol. And I'll just give you an example. We had a parent earlier this year, their child was going through a drug and alcohol unit, and unfortunately, someone in their family was lost due to drugs and alcohol. So that was a very sensitive issue to the child. So we came up with alternative assignments for that child to work on. So I'm bringing that up as an example because we are always about working with our parents. We are here for our community and we are here for our parents. And, that's really what we're always going to do. So the transparency aspect of the letter, letting parents kind of weigh in, these are topics that I would prefer my child not engage in for whatever reason. Like, we're going to respect that.
So I'd like to work backwards from a few points that several of you have mentioned. First off is the categorization work to be involved to categorize classroom libraries. I can say with all certainty, if we go to a categorization, this board will provide whatever assistance is needed to get those categorized. We wouldn't place it just on the teacher in the classroom to do that extra work to categorize, to retain and prevent the point of teachers just saying, I'm going to pull my old classroom library. If we need to hire a part-time librarian to assist in categorization, I think that's something that the board would entertain doing. So to that point of losing our classroom libraries, if we have to provide assistance to allow teachers to do that, we'll absolutely will do that because that's how dedicated we are to this topic. The piece that I keep coming back to is if a child brings a book home that a parent finds objectionable. Well, if that child has brought home a book that a parent finds objectionable, then that child has already looked in that book. Okay, if I as a parent don't want my child exposed to the content of a certain book, the fact that they can select it off of the shelf and read through it in independent reading prior to it coming home and me discovering that they've had access to it is really the issue here. So when we receive a notice from a parent that says, I don't want my child to expose to a book in a certain category, we're in effect already categorizing because when you get that notice from that parent, the teacher is in effect then going through in their own mind what books that would apply to and is in effect already categorizing. What we're doing here is we're making this official and we're establishing what those categories would be. So one of the problems that I have with our classroom library right now is a teacher's knowledge of what's in their classroom library. Several teachers would admit very candidly, I don't know every book that's in my classroom library. And those are the ones that may not have put them online. So this is a multifaceted thing we need to cover. Teachers need to know what's in their classrooms because they may have inserted a book on a recommendation but have not read it. And that was the case recently with the one that we recently, several months ago, discussed. The teacher was aware of the book, but that could have very easily been a scenario where the teacher said, I didn't know that was in that. And that's not acceptable to have in our school. There's a reason we have libraries and curriculum is to determine what is appropriately placed in our schools. I challenge anyone to say we can put every book in our schools because we're already there. We already prohibit vulgarity, profanity. There are several things that we across the board say this is not appropriate for kids. And so we are already there When people say we're instituting a book ban, we're instituting a book categorization so parents can in effect ban kids for books for their own children because they want it to be a topic that they address at home solely between parent and child. And I think we need to afford them that. And that's why I firmly believe we should be categorizing our books.
If I may add to that, what you just said, it was just acknowledged here a moment ago by administration that we had a book that everyone who was involved found objectionable.
Right.
The teacher, the administrator, everyone who looked at this said, whoa, this should never have been in the school. That's why this topic has to be here. There was a book that everyone knew was inappropriate for middle schools that was in our middle school. Okay, so we
Except
can
for the
say all
teacher
we
that placed
want
it.
that,
Right.
this isn't happening or whatever. It already happened, and that's the reason for this topic. And this is not part of the reason you're on this committee is because we have a lot of respect for you. And so for you to say you trust everything that's in your library, we kind of trust everything that's in your library too. But there are other teachers out there that may not know what's in their library, and that's where this example came up from.
And I don't want to get us sidetracked to the book that sort of led to this, but I would be curious to know how many people read that whole book. There was a very vulgar page in that book, which I 100% agree with. It was also a book that saved a kid's life who was considering ending his life because of what was happening to him in that book. So granted, that one page was very vulgar, and I would hope that anybody who objected to that book had taken the time to read the whole book. I do believe that if a student had picked up that book and looked at the back cover, they would have never taken it home if that was not a topic that was of interest to them. I also think they would have, before they got to that very vulgar part, there were other parts leading up to that they would have been, this isn't for me. This isn't, and maybe I'm naive in that. Maybe I'm, naive and wrong in that. But I do, that book, I am a very conservative person. That book had parts that offended me, but the overall message at the end of that book was about saving a child's life who was getting ready to take his own life. So I have to look at that as like there was value in that book, and there might have been kids who needed that book. I am not saying it should be, it's not on my shelf, it's not in my classroom. I understand that, but sometimes there are books that the kids are going to need that other kids don't need. So it gets very tricky.
And I've heard that argument before, that there's some value in some of these books, and I don't disagree with that. But my problem is, if an author wants a child to gain something of value, then they should not put sexual material in there. And if they do, we should not be providing it for our children. There can be other books that have that same exact value without putting X-rated material into schools. So I get, and I've read some of these personally, just so I can address that point. Like, have you read the whole book? Yes, I see the value in where this book's going. But if you're going to include, it's the same way I grew up with X-rated movies, like, not X-rated, R-rated movies. If you're going to put a movie that you want children to watch, don't include graphic sexual material into it. And that's just, I think it goes back to these authors, but we cannot support these authors continuing to do this, or we'll get more of the same.
Now, that being said, I do applaud and commend that you've instituted you said 2 or 3 teacher review.
I think I said 2 additional teachers.
2 additional, so
And I'd like to add
three
Dr.
total.
Burkhart's
So-
administration on that as well. He had
Right,
the idea of
exactly.
taking that to
So,
administration. I
so
think
the
it's a great
fact that we
idea.
have an extra 2, basically 2 layers of redundancy for review is excellent. I applaud and appreciate that addition into our current structure. That's very important. So that we have a teacher who might think this is okay, and you have 2 more teachers to look and agree or disagree. But I do think we're basically, if we get to a book where one teacher or more disagrees with the other one, then we have to at least say, what is the category we're objecting to? Because now we're placing one teacher over another as far as value of opinion. So if we're able to say this falls into this category that a majority of parents are concerned about, we can at least place initially in this review we can say this is clearly in one of our sexual content, violence categories. If we have a book that we're reviewing that falls in those categories, it is easy enough for our teachers to say, this fell into this category, so that parents who are very busy working double jobs can look and say, I need to review this book prior to my child seeing it, because it comes back to the comments of, if a kid is opening a book and finds it not to their liking, they're going to put it back. Just as often, what's going to happen is that child's going to take that book and take it to a classmate and say, look, it's what's in here. I can't believe this. Look, and they're going to show it to other children. And then you're including the content to a wider audience instead of doing the opposite, which is categorizing. And then we have that category that the parent can say, not to my child, before they see it. That's really where I'm taking us to. We need to have a system that we can prevent the child from accessing the book to begin with.
I guess I would ask, taking this one book out of the equation, have we needed that system in the past? Have we needed a categorization system? Like, I have not had any book objections in my 14 years of teaching. I've not had, like, that's 14 years where I've put the right books in the right hands of the right kids. So I would like to see this process play out and see, like, let's let this work its system. Let's make sure, like, I think it will ensure the right books are on our shelves. It will ensure that and I can't guarantee, I can't promise, I'm one person, but I would like to see this play out before we would step anywhere close to, like, that would be my department's, I'm speaking on behalf of my department, that would be my department's preference and wish. And, like, ELA teachers are very passionate and are very, like, when I think about the amount of time ELA teachers spend giving feedback to kids on their writing, conferencing with kids about their books, they are some of the most conscientious teachers that you will find. And I know I can't categorize and classify, but I feel like we have worked really hard to put a system in place that is going to do right by our kids and keep the right books in there, and also just put the right books in the right hands. So I would love to see where this goes first.
So again, I commend the review process. I think that's a good key. But just to get back to what you're saying and how we're categorizing this with review, and you said that you hadn't had a book challenge. So last year there was a book that was challenged in the high school, and the school policy review process requires that book to be read by 5 different school individuals. I think one's a parent and 4 administration, librarian, and a teacher. It's 5 overall. And the book passed unanimously by all involved because of what we spoke about before, because of the meaning at the end, because it had a good value at the end. I read the book and I found it completely inappropriate for all ages. It had graphic depictions and descriptions of minors having sex, described the process and the feelings and everything. And this was unanimously approved by 5 people. And I find it completely inappropriate for children. So that's where we come into that problem. Who are we selecting to do this review? And have we set up the guidelines that says, listen, we're not basing this book off of the outcome. Does it have sexual material that's appropriate for children? And if it does, then there's a problem. And so that's where that review can be hairy too.
And I can't speak for the high school. I can only speak for what we do here. And so that's why I think that Follett Tidal Wave, like, it's going to give you the age ranges. I just would really like to see that process maybe play out.
So in doing the 2 to 3 teacher review, we are in effect deciding appropriateness for the books as as one of the board members, where I would like to start is by asking, does anyone sitting at this table feel like sexual content or sexual orientation or gender identity material is appropriate in our schools?
I think that we don't parent 4,200 students. We parent our students. So in my house, I can tell you for two of my children, absolutely not. They are too young. They will not grasp it. It will be funny. There will be snicklers. We can't make it through a day without the word fart. So I cannot even imagine if I gave them a book like that, what would happen in my house. Because the questions would not be appropriate. They would not understand them. They couldn't grasp them. And frankly, I would probably do more damage than good trying to help them. But for my older two children, an 8th grader and a 9th grader, who walk these hallways and the hallways of York Tech, my oldest is at York Tech, and they experience children with these lived experiences, maybe not their own lived experiences, but someone else's. I can't see myself limiting them to understanding the people in the world that they will experience when they're not in my home. I believe in age appropriateness. Absolutely. I believe the brain of the child develops and there's a certain period of time where we understand our point in the universe versus our point in the monkey mind, which is self-based. But I can't make that decision for other people's children, which is why we get the signatures, which is why you can say whatever this list needs to be for your home, that is your choice. And then whatever this list needs to be for the Weavers, it is my choice. If I don't want my children to read about something I experienced in my life because I'm not prepared to handle those questions, this is where I'm allowed to do that. But if my child is questioning things that I don't understand because they have a best friend who has a completely learned different experience than I have in my home, someday they're not going to be at my kitchen table. Someday they're going to be at college or at a job or I don't know, at a concert venue. And they may need to understand something that I haven't taught them that maybe someone who's skilled in teaching and writing could do. And I'm very intelligent, but I don't know everything and I will never pretend to. So if there's a resource my child can have at an appropriate age, at an appropriate reading level with my permission or the permission of any other parent, I don't believe I get to make the decision for all the other parents in this district. I don't. That is my point.
So to exactly that point, I too agree, we don't parent for 4,200 children. What we're doing by allowing the teachers to decide what's appropriate for our kids is we are in effect allowing the school to decide do the job of the parent. The parent has the right to decide what their kid should have access to, not the teacher. And that's what we're getting to here. So we are in effect parenting 4,200 kids when we allow these books to be given access to those kids without a parent knowing what's in them. And that's the point. I'm not advocating for a book ban. I'm advocating, we very clearly, I asked the question,
Ladies and gentlemen, please, there will be time for visitors at the end.
I asked the question, who here felt it was appropriate to not allow sexual content, sexual orientation, and sexual identity content in our schools? And where I'm working from is parents want to know if that is in their children's books before the child has access to it. That is where I'm working from. And that's why this categorization, to my mind, must happen so that the parents know this book is something that I don't want my child to have access to. That's what must happen, to my mind, is a categorization, including the teachers, that say, this has this content, so that a parent can decide what's appropriate, not the school. The school is simply providing the category. The parent gets the final word.
Am I misunderstanding in that that is what this letter does?
This letter says books. This letter says, I give my child permission to check out books out of the classroom library. The challenge for a parent is to read I'll tell you right now, the 7th grade ELA my daughter is in, 682 books are in the classroom library. What parent has the time to go through? Agreed, there will be some parents that will read all 682 because they have the time. But hardworking parents engaged in double jobs,
Matt, that's
I am not saying he's not. Let me finish my sentence. What I'm saying is hardworking parents who are engaged in double jobs and taking their kids to and from practices will not be able to get through all 682 without immense effort, okay? And I applaud your immense effort, okay? But not all parents are going to have that capability, okay? And that's really the crux of this. So to allow parents the capability, we will do the work for them by categorizing what books exist.
Ms. Clancy.
I
Did
will-
I?
So
Oh, shh. Ladies and gentlemen,
Just-
please.
just a few things. I keep hearing like the three labels that you keep referring to are sexual. Can you read them again? The
Sexual content.
sexual content.
Sexual orientation, gender
So
identity.
those are three very different categories in my mind.
Agreed.
Like there is like promiscuous sexuality has no place in a middle school classroom library. I 100% agree with that. But I will not take books off of my shelf that have LGBTQ characters or transgender characters because we talked about at the beginning, those window and mirror books are so important. And just because you read it just gives you empathy. And so that's where the categorization gets really gray.
But exactly
and
to your
really
point.
worrisome.
And that's where I take it. So you have objectionable when it comes to sexual content, but not LGBTQ, for example. Whereas the next parent would find LGBTQ highly offensive, as offensive, if not more, than sexual content. So allowing the categorization to let the parent decide what is appropriate to say, I'm not maybe to allow the parent to make that. I get your concern with how do we manage what is appropriate for the children. We share that concern. The difference is how do we get there, right? What you're advocating is the teachers decide what's appropriate based on a 2 to 3 teacher review.
And a website that gives age appropriate reviews and recommendations.
Right, and
That's the first piece.
and back to that point, so when you mentioned the Follett tidal wave with reviews and reliable reviews, who decides what's a reliable review in Follett?
Okay.
Yep.
Is that a public review or is that, who?
Wait, just one sec, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of passion on this topic, and we understand that from the audience and from the board members. Please allow the conversation to take place at the committee level. There will be time for public comment at the end. I ask that you allow this discussion to take place, and it is modeling what good dialogue is for our students who may be watching. So again, not to diminish anyone's passion, we get it, we understand it. That's why we're here today, but please allow this dialogue to take place. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Dr.
we are on the same team. We want what's
Mhm.
best for kids. Like we're here because of kids.
Mhm.
And
And-
I don't want this to be adversarial in any way.
It's- no,
This is
it
the
is
dialogue
not,
that needs
but
to happen. We need to have this
It
discussion
does. It
on
does.
behalf of our population, right? Some people believe this 100% needs to stay. Some people believe this 100% needs to go. Where I'm urging us is as a point of in-between and moderation is we are not going to remove banned books. We are going to categorize books so that parents can do it for their own children. That's the in-between I'm advocating for here. And we're just talking semantics, how we get there, basically.
And I think it's supposed to be easier. The end goal is that this is easier for teachers to say this is or is not acceptable for this child based off of the parents' reviews. And that's where the category comes in. It's supposed to be easier for you.
To me, I see the letter as the in-between. And I see the categorization as closer to an area where we maybe don't want to go. So I'll reiterate again, I am unfortunately I have kids to teach.
Yes.
Yep.
And I am going to go teach them. But
Mrs.
I
Clancy.
would reiterate
Thank
that
you.
that letter is a good.
It's a great starting point. Thank you.
And thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that concludes Ms. Clancy's presentation. As Dr. Burkhart gave me when we first started today, we had quite a few people sign in. Everybody that has signed in and has not elected or chosen the box that says they would like to speak, you will be recorded in the minutes as being in attendance. And then for the list I have in front of me, these are members that signed.
Sorry, Mandy, before we proceed past discussion, we can continue with committee discussion
Oh,
prior
I'm
to,
sorry. Okay,
if you don't mind.
go right ahead.
So as a committee, I still feel like we have to get an overall sense of the committee's wish to proceed with a categorization or whether we wish to just continue with a current 3-panel teacher review of material in classroom library specifically. So that's where I would refocus the committee discussion. Does the committee feel like a 3-teacher review is appropriate to provide that level of protection for the parent to be able to say, this is something that, a prohibition, if you will?
So respectfully, just so I understand, you are not voting in this because you're not a member of this committee, correct? Isn't it when the president sits in? We created 4 out of the 9.
I am asking that the discussion be that the committee
Right, I just want to make
present,
sure,
yeah,
okay.
He can still
I-
be a voting member.
yes, I can.
Okay,
I'm just not-
not familiar with how that
Yes,
works.
the
'Cause we
ex
didn't used to
officio
do it
piece,
this
just so
way.
everyone understands, because it's new to me as well, and I had to have Dr. Dalton explain it very clearly. The board president can be present and vote at all committee meetings, is not considered in whether we have a quorum or not.
Okay,
That's the only admonition of ex officio piece of.
okay, just want to make sure I understood it right because we haven't done it this way.
The only
Yep.
question I really wanted to ask Ms. Clancy, and I'm sure you can take it back to her, is I love that you guys have done the categories already, not categories, the catalog currently. My only question is then why can't we share that with the parents? Because then the parents can make informed decisions for the books that are in the classrooms. And whether they're available to the entire public or whether they're available to just the parents in that classroom, that can be determined at a later time. But if we have some teachers like Miss Clancy that has already taken the initiative to make it public.
It's not public. Her list is on her Canvas site, which is
which
then
makes it
any
public
parent.
to the parents that has this
Right,
Sapphire
right.
account.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah,
So
it's
why
assigned to
can't
your-
we do that for everybody is all I'm asking.
it's assigned to the child's Canvas. So you have to be an observer of your child's Canvas class
Correct.
for that individualized teacher.
But we
Okay.
currently have some that do and some that
Yes,
do
sir.
not. So my
Yes.
question is, why?
So why is it not available to everybody? I
Correct.
think from our perspective, I think our goal was if there was a concern, sorry, if there was a concern that a parent would reach out to the teacher, who would then reach out to me, and we would meet and we would have a discussion and we would look at the list. We would look at the list of books and talk about the books that they had concerns with.
So, so my only thing would be then, why not just be proactive and give that information? Because let's face it, I don't have time to read 700 books.
Neither do I.
And I do have trust in the teachers that they're gonna do a very good job of filtering out some of these. However, there are parents that do not want their kids reading some of this material. So that would follow up with the next part of this permission slip is great. Why can't we at least list categories on this permission slip? So now the parents are able to say, no, I don't want my kid to read that subject. No, I don't want my kid to read. Now you're truly putting it in the hands of the parents and not making the parents go out of their way to read 700 books to choose which ones are appropriate. So instead of having additional, I mean, you can leave the additional comments, but break down, do I want my child to read violence? No, I'm not saying I don't want to, but if there's parents that don't want their child to read the Hunger Games because of violence, they should be able to just say, nope, I don't want violence. No, I don't want, sexual content. And for those that are so concerned about this banning of books, like Mr. Galazello pointed out at the beginning, we already currently ban material in this school. A kid cannot walk into this school with a Playboy magazine. It's just not appropriate. And I can tell you, I did read that book that has been referenced. I actually ordered it from Amazon. And I cringed when I read that book. It was completely inappropriate. And I'm going to share some of it just because we think it's so appropriate to be in schools and not have some kind of overview on this. There was a portion of that book that had 5 or 6 kids in a tent who was masturbating. And a younger kid popped his head into the tent and they said, "You're too young to be in here." And he said, "No, I'm not too young." And they said, "Great. Anybody that can't come in this bottle has to drink it." That was in one of our books in our school. Those are the materials that the board has concern with. So, yes, I do not want my daughter reading material like that. Thanks.
I, in response to your question from before, I am comfortable with what the middle school teachers were tasked to create. I believe they did a good job. I also believe that if we are systematic in our approach, we should change one variable at a time. And this is a decent variable to start to see, as Ms. Clancy said, how this plays out. So at this point in time, if you're asking me if I believe it should be categorized or if we should start with what was proposed by the teachers we tasked with creating a process, I would like to see us move forward with what the teachers created. And if at that time we feel it is still not significant enough and has not made the difference that the full board was looking to see, then we move forward from there. But to give credit to the seasoned educators that did create this, who lose sleep, I'm sure, just like the rest of us parents, over the children in their classrooms, I think we should allow this to go as it is written. That is my personal opinion on this committee.
So the distinction I would make between going forward with the proposed 3-teacher review or categorization is, to Mr. Lady's point earlier, we had a book at the high school that was reviewed by a 5-person panel and found to be appropriate, even though some parents will continue to find that book inappropriate. So the distinction is, if a book continues after the 3-teacher review and parents find it objectionable, it's going to come down to the semantics of that book and what was in that book specifically, as opposed to then the parent has to wonder, is the next book appropriate? In categorizing our material, we are en masse giving that parent the comfort to know that this topic is not going to be presented to my child. And that's really the end-all be-all of where we should be operating from. To say the teacher reviewed this book doesn't cover a parent's concern of, because parents are going to disagree. Some parents are going to disagree with a 3-teacher panel review. It's cleaner and it's more effective to be able to say this, that have that same 3-teacher review say this falls into this category, because then we're not having the teacher decide whether it's appropriate for children. We're having the teacher decide what's in the book. And that's really the distinction we need to make here. Teachers should be able to very clearly, I agree that our educators have a wealth of experience. They should be able to agree what's in the book. Appropriateness, that's decided by the parent. So when we go to categories, what we're doing is we're saying, teachers, please identify what categories this book falls into, instead of what's appropriate for someone else's child. Because again, we get into that. The school is parenting for the child in place of the parent when the school gets to decide what's appropriate for the child. I think it's more appropriate to, for instead of going with a 3-teacher review for appropriateness and placement, the 3-teacher review should be, what category does this book fall into? So that they are not making a decision whether it's appropriate for a child or not. That's the difference in approach I'm advocating for.
So to go back to a point that was made earlier about everybody being different and that we don't parent, 4,000 students or whatever. We are a governing body, and our country has always legislated morality. For example, you must be 18 years old to look at pornography. That our government says so. Okay, so why would that be any different here? We are tasked to create policy and rules to protect minor children almost exclusively. There are some exceptions of children that are over 18, but almost exclusively we have minors. So why would we allow any form of sexuality? The fact that you can justify any of that is absurd in my mind. So as far as making decisions about sexual in nature, I don't think that should even be an option. It shouldn't even be in here. But I think this is a middle ground that we're saying, hey, we should at least identify which books are sexual in nature. Now, the next thing is, it was brought up that books would fall into separate categories. Clearly, that's going to happen. This isn't a library where it has to be shelved in the,
Dewey Decimal.
whatever system. Okay, all these books are going to be on the same shelf. But this is in a guide. The teacher or whoever knows about this book is going to sit down and say, all right, this book falls under these 5 categories. And then when we send this home, if a box is checked that the parent doesn't want their child having that, that is meant to make it easier for the parent, for the teacher to say, okay, that book categorizes as vulgar and parent says you can't have vulgar. That also requires our teachers to know what's in the books, which is what we had an issue with earlier, teachers not knowing what content these books had. We keep relating back to these reviews. The reviews don't tell you what's in a book, okay? Teacher needs to know what's in that. A review is very generalized, and it could be a whole book with right dead smack in the middle is a graphic depiction of violence or sexual content. And that we need to know if that's in that book, and the review will not cover that. Finally, I think, this paper's good. This permission slip is good, but if I read this, it would look to me whether it's an opt-in or opt-out. This doesn't ask, it says additional comments, but it's not directing a parent to say, hey, please don't provide sexual content to my child. So I agree with having it directly on the paper. These are the categories that we have selected: violence, sexual content, whatever, put it right out there on the list so that parents can pay attention. Now, we'll have parents that won't read this or pay any attention to it, and then they don't get to partake in, and that's fine. Some parents will sign it, and it'll be wide open. And again, I think that this is a middle ground, allowing some of these books to stay in, but allowing parents to opt out specifically under categories. No, I don't care what you say. No parents reading all 600 books. No parents doing it. No one has the time for it. It's not happening. And so you can't know what's in there, but our teachers should be required to know that if they're putting that in their library. So
My only concern with that, Mr. Lighty, is if you think about, and I do agree, it would be an extreme amount of work for the teachers, and you're also asking them to put their biased opinion on, or unbiased opinion on, what a book categories as.
sure, there's gray areas.
And Mrs. Clancy actually, referenced it, what you consider sexual in nature is not going to be the same as what I consider sexual in nature. She actually referenced, a kid
Yes.
that kisses the hand of another child. Is that sexual in nature? Probably not to 98% of the people out there. But when you put those limitations on a teacher, I do agree that the only thing I love this. I mean, the only thing I would like to see would be a list of categories that are just, whether they're bold, whatever it may be, that the parents can say, no, I'm not gonna let my kid read sexual material. You know, I can tell you that I would allow that, but it would be my trust in the teacher that I wouldn't allow extreme sexual content. You know, a kid kissing a kid's hand is okay to me. You know, they're gonna learn more from the books and the internet than they'll learn from us probably any day of the week. But I would also have a conversation with a teacher that and let my expectations known, which I have already done that. And the parents that don't get involved in some level are gonna do the same whether we spend the time on categorizing every book or not. That's
So if I can clarify your position, moving forward, we go with the letter. I like the 2 teacher, 1 administrator review before we bring a book in. We put categories on the back of this, but not necessarily categories or classrooms. I think that puts more work on the teacher, but I understand that that would be. So what I mean by more work on the teacher is when a child brings a book up, a teacher now on the spot has to go, what does that book have in it? Do you know what I mean? That's why I think that that's more work and creates more falls in the system. If we went ahead and categorized it ahead of time, I think it'd be a lot easier. But again, to your point, we've listed categories on here, but we haven't categorized the actual classroom. And I think that that would be a acceptable middle ground for me, if that's what you're saying.
So I have to interject with the logistics, right? So in bringing forward a 3-teacher review, I need to understand, Dr. Smale. So the proposed 3-teacher review of classroom libraries, we have 3 teachers that have volunteered to review.
That's not what the slide said. The
That's
slide
what I'm
said
trying to
it was a
understand. So-
review if the material was deemed questionable as per the listed sites. So if it went through the process and you couldn't find a review that said, you know, I use this in my 6th grade English class, or we've used this successfully with 8th to 11th graders. So if there's nothing to that standard that the teacher can find, as I read the slide, that's when it went to a review. So it is not every
that's why I'm
single
asking for the
solitary book that
clarification.
goes
So
into.
typically, as I shared earlier, our goal was to really tighten up the process and make it a vetted process because I'll be perfectly honest, up to this point, teachers have made selections on their own. So this typically how I would see this happening is by grade level, because 6th grade kids are still very elementary. I mean,
Right.
I'm speaking in generalities. 7th grade is sort of the coming to age where the kids go through a lot of changes, and by 8th grade, they really look like high school kids. So you walk around our building, we have the shortest range of discrepancy by 6 to 8, but it's like night and day between downstairs hallway and hallways and upstairs hallways. So I would envision by grade level, the teachers would meet and talk about the books that they wanted to add. And if there was a concern of a book being more mature in topic, that would be a book that they could refer to administration to take a look at and kind of help with that process. In regards, I want to go back to this something that Mr. Leidy shared about the book reviews. One of the things I asked for the team that, if you go on websites, you can find, I'm making up a number, 300 different book review sites that are out there. So our goal was to tighten that up, and the 4 that were chosen by the ELA department are pretty reputable book review sites, in addition to the Follett. So, before you could go out and find a book review really anywhere. I mean, that's just this is one of the things about the internet. So that was really kind of tightening that up and making that streamlined. So I believe that will remove the large majority of books that would be deemed inappropriate. And then I feel this process will take care of that. I really do. I go back to, again, there will always be some parents who maybe have some concerns about a book. And to me, that is the partnership that we ask for all of our parents to have with the teachers. And then if there's still, concern, then it comes through me or our assistant principals, and we deal with it that way. In regards to the letter, we could, and this is just a thought I had, instead of putting multiple categories there, do we just create a mature category. This is a more mature category. And if we have books that we're not real sure of, but we feel some kids could benefit from, it's a more mature category. And then the parents who are willing or open to their kids having access to those books, then that's a discussion that they have with the teacher, or they let them know that on the letter. That's
So,
just the top.
so you mentioned the teacher reviews for new additions. How are we addressing what's currently there?
So that's a good question. Again, the books are currently, and again, I don't want to say an absolute certainty is every single book in a teacher's classroom on their website, but I would think that, I'm making up a number here, but I think I'm pretty close. 90% of them would be. But are we going back? And the reality is there are some books that teachers get, books that are donated. Teachers get books that kids bring in sometimes. And I think in the past, it was just sort of, we're going to just add these books to our library.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that to be critical. That's just how we've handled things. And I think this process will tighten that up.
I do like this process for new additions with the caveat of categorization, but let's go back to what's there currently. So I feel like low bar standard, we should require every teacher to know what is in their classroom. If they don't, it shouldn't be there. Does anyone disagree with that? We should at least know what's in our classroom as a teacher?
I'm going to assume, and I know assuming is dangerous, that they do.
Yeah.
I would assume there might be a small percentage that they might have someone donate and haven't had a chance to read it. But I would say that I would expect our teachers to know. One other thing, when I was talking with Mrs. Clancy when she had left, just a rough number. There's 14 teachers in your ELA department, Jeff, at your building. Assuming that I'm sure there's classroom libraries in your social studies department
Right.
and other classrooms. If each one of those teachers has on average, let's say 600 books, that's 8,400 books. Now granted, there will absolutely be duplicate titles.
There's a lot of duplicates.
That's not to be said. But so I'm clear, and the board is clear, the committee is clear. These are individual classroom libraries. This is not inclusive of district adopted titles.
That's correct.
So the other question I would have, if the board were to move in this direction, Mr. Gelazella, to the categorization that you're speaking of, and that action was taken, let's just say March 13th, I think is February 20th, whatever that would be. Until this process is complete, would that immediately shelve all these library books from circulation until it is complete?
No.
So where I would advocate first is to make it clear to all our teachers that if you don't know what's in a book in your classroom, it should be removed until you do.
Okay.
That would be the first very clear signal I would suggest from my perspective is if you don't know what's in it, it shouldn't be delivered to the children.
Now, just so I'm clear, Mr. Gelazella, that's not read, but you should know the content.
Know what's in it,
Okay.
right?
Well, I don't disagree with using this tidal wave website to categorize them. I mean, I'm not saying that every teacher has to read the whole thing. Now, I'm going to do my due diligence and check this site out for bias, but my assumption is that the teachers have selected this because it's a very neutral, reputable site, well, which I'm still going to look into. But I think cataloging it by that as a starting point,
I think a teacher should know what they're providing to the
have
children.
read the whole thing. Yeah.
Yes, and
Okay.
and to that point, to your point, Dr. Burkhart, ELA has the heaviest lift here, right? They have
Yes.
the biggest category books. So, and that's where I fall back to in having this discussion with individual board members. That where I go with this is if they need assistance doing that, we can provide them a librarian or a part-time librarian as a board. We can do that. Because I understand this is going to be hardest for our ELA who has the reading selections, right? So we have a proposal for new additions, how we vet them, but what's there, I would suggest immediate removal if you don't know what's there, pending understanding what's in your books. And then if you're not sure, then you can, as a teacher, if you're not sure whether to appropriateness, again, you could take it to a 3-panel review and say, hey, guys, what do you think? But ultimately, I still think appropriateness should be decided by the parent. The teacher should be categorizing, say, when they say, what do you think? They should be discussing, does this have sexual content? Does this have a high degree of violence? Does this have a low degree of violence, right? Allow the teachers who have dealt with this realm for ages I mean, they're gonna have an understanding of what parents might find controversial, right? So they're gonna be able to best capable of saying, this falls in this category. Without deciding appropriateness, they're deciding the category. Let the parent decide the appropriateness.
And I would assume, again, I probably shouldn't say that, that you would expect this type of categorization to go from K to 12. This is not limited to just the middle school, because there are classroom libraries in all grades across the district.
I don't know that I'm concerned about elementary at this time, personally.
So then you're looking at 6 through 12 then.
So, again, I'm gonna use, I too am gonna assume, that we are not, that no teacher is bringing in sexual content books or other possibly objectionable materials to an elementary level. But again, that's an assumption,
Well, there could be violence, it could be considered violence.
right?
You know, because again, I do feel like Mrs. Clancy talked about the slippery slope. And then, and Mr. Lay, I appreciate your perspective on the idea that the heavy lift. I will tell you from conversations I've had with teachers, there will 100% be classroom libraries removed from classrooms. It is a guarantee. So I just want everyone in this committee to understand that one collateral piece of this will be teachers will just say, I'm not doing it, and off it goes. And so it's going to be limited to what is school adopted, which is fine, and then what's available in the library, which would also be fine. But I just want everyone to understand that it's not an attempt to make an idle threat, because it's not my decision, it's a teacher's decision.
Mhm.
The conversations I've had with teachers, some as recent as today, classroom libraries will go away.
And to that point, and we've discussed that prior, these are their books.
Right.
They're their books,
Right.
right? They own them. So they absolutely have the right to do so with their property, right?
I agree.
And if they have concern or worry as to appropriateness of a book, then I'd want them to remove it. If they're worried whether it's going to get them in hot water or create problems as their own perspective, I'm not suggesting anything more than categorizing those books. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be held responsible for a content that someone else might find objectionable. I'm suggesting we categorize. If a teacher if a teacher feels unsure that their books are going to create problems for them, then I would argue that they know it's controversial in some way.
I don't think the book is what they're concerned about. I think they're concerned about the policing, the monitoring, and the additional steps it will take when they've not, Mrs. Clancy
Fair-
said
fair enough.
14 years? Did she say 14 years?
Yes, that's correct.
She's never had to do that in her career. And I've not had any conversation with Mrs. Clancy. I'm strictly going by what she said. I think there's concern about a book that could be found to be not categorized as sexual at all, but some person or persons found a part of that book where they felt it. And then with that categorization, they're going to have to answer to it. And it's very, you saw the stress.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm just
Yeah,
concerned.
so I'd like to add clarity to that point. So I want to be clear, I can only speak for myself as a board member. This is by no means a witch hunt. If a teacher has a book that the board, one of the board members would find objectionable, it's not our role to decide what a parent thinks is appropriate or isn't appropriate, okay? What I'm suggesting is we need to get categorized. So if a teacher has a book and we might find objectionable, we're still going to a categorization, all right? And until we get to the categorization, all we're asking for is a removal till we categorize. That's where I'm,
Controversial book.
right, a controversial book.
So,
It's-
but okay, so let's move out of ELA. Let's move into science.
Okay,
If a family strongly believes that